Many undocumented immigrants in the United States are on edge since the Department of Homeland Security released new guidelines upping immigration enforcement. I'm Femi Okay.
I'm Malika Bilal. Today on the stream, we look at what's next for the country's undocumented. Here's Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, detailing those guidelines.
The memo regarding the executive order border security and immigration enforcement improvements outlines the steps that DHS will take to secure the nation's southern border, prevent further illegal immigration, and to repatriate illegal immigrants swiftly, consistently, and humanely.
The guidelines released by the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, which would expedite the process of detaining and deporting people, have put the future of the country's estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in question.
The Trump administration says they are prioritizing individuals with criminal records.
Everybody who is here illegally is subject to removal at any time. That is consistent with every country, not just ours. If you're in this country in an illegal manner, that obviously there's a provision that could ensure that you be removed. But the priority that the president has laid forward and the priority that ICE is putting forward through DHS's guidance is to make sure that the people who have committed a crime or pose a threat to our public safety are the priority of their efforts, first and foremost.
DHS outlines that people in violation of immigration laws could also be subject to arrest, detention, and even deportation.
But some policy observers say the Obama administration, known for deporting the most undocumented immigrants of any administration, paved the way for these new policies. So to help us talk about this, we have Avide Musavian. She is a policy attorney at the National Immigration Law Center in Washington, D.C. Jessica Vaughan, Director of the Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. She is coming to us from the U.S. state of Massachusetts. And Cesar Vargas, co-director of Dream Action Coalition, and he's the New York's first undocumented attorney. And before we get started, we also reached out to the Department of Homeland Security and also Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and we didn't hear back from the DHS, and ICE declined to participate in this discussion, but welcome everybody else. Jessica, if you were very candid about what is different now with US immigration policy from before January the 20th and after January the 20th, when President Trump became President Trump, what would you say?
Well, there is a big difference. The Trump administration's goal is to restore normal enforcement of our immigration laws and to allow the agents and officers of the Department of Homeland Security to enforce the laws as they were written and as Congress intended and as the public expects to see happen. So that instead of having large really almost everyone who's here illegally being exempted from deportation, as was the policy under the Obama administration, unless you were convicted of a serious crime or a number of lesser crimes, you were exempt from deportation. Now the opposite is true. As you heard Sean Spicer say, anyone who is in the country illegally is potentially subject to deportation, and so that's the policy moving forward, to enforce the law as it's written.
Cesar, you're undocumented and an attorney, and an immigration attorney at that. Have you noticed a difference between January and now with your workload, how people are coming to you? What's changed for you?
Well, the most obvious change has been the panic and the genuine fear of the immigrant community that's feeling this type of persecution of their families. And when we talk about immigration, or we need to enforce immigration, the laws, we need to ensure that these immigration laws affect American families. It is not just the them versus us. These immigration laws affect American families just as any other family. So when we're talking about, well, we need to ensure that we are keeping people away who don't belong here, let's remember that a large percentage of people here living in the United States live in mixed status families, meaning that their spouse are U.S. citizens, so the children are U.S. citizens, but the parents are undocumented, or in instance where military service members, veterans, are being deported, or military families are being ripped apart because the spouse might be undocumented, but the husband might be in the U.S. Marines. So I think that is the main difference that we are seeing, that there is a genuine fear in the community. But I think Jessica is correct in that there is a normal enforcement, but we are enforcing a broken immigration system that is outdated, that doesn't work, does not fit within our economic demands. And I think that is the major difference, that immigration customs enforcement agents are enforcing the law, but they're enforcing a broken immigration system that we are now seeing, not just going after the violent rapists, the criminals, the murderers. We're going after people with no criminal records. We're going after people with minor criminal records of either not paying their tickets. So that's a major difference that we need to really understand.
So I hear you there, Cesar. Jessica, go ahead.
Can I actually just jump in?
That wasn't me. I think that was somebody else who was trying to speak.
Okay, well, then I want to read these two perspectives online, because I hear what, Cesar, I heard what you were saying, but I want to bring this up. This is Isadera, who says, I don't understand all the fuss. They're undocumented, after all. Any country would deport them. Is it about them, or is it about the current president of the United States, Trump? So that's one perspective. Avida, I will share this other perspective with you. This is Michelle, who kind of pushes back against the idea that this is just about Trump. She says, people are looking back at Obama through the glasses of nostalgia, but these deportations are not new, and this can't be ignored. The problem is that there are certain issues, immigration, war, etc., that are somehow less offensive under Democrats for some reason. So do you agree with what she's saying? Was this just as bad in November?
Yeah, I will say we reached historic levels of deportations under the Obama administration. And that's exactly why in November 2014, the administration said, you know what, this doesn't make sense. It's not a rational use of our limited law enforcement budget. It's also not a rational or humane way to enforce our immigration laws by splitting up families, disrupting workplaces. So to the extent that people are saying this has happened before and there are people that are under the current priorities that have been targeted under Obama, that's true. However, I would say there's nothing normal about the fact that there is a call for a tripling of ICE personnel. There's a call for a $20 billion plus price tag to expand the already heavily militarized border. And there's the fact that under Obama, part of the priorities, part of what was included in that was a sense that we want to create some limits. Yes, people who are here are undocumented for various reasons, and as Cesar said, it's because we have a dysfunctional immigration system where even under family sponsorship, people are waiting for sometimes decades at a time. So they're in an impossible situation where they're essentially landlocked in the US and they don't have status, and they contribute in every possible way, and yet we haven't given them a legal pathway to normalize their status. So the President Obama recognized we need to tailor our enforcement priorities to some degree. Because
let me just play a little bit of President Obama, because I think in this context, I think you'd be very surprised about, is there any difference between this current administration and the last administration? Have a listen to President Obama, former President Obama.
Even as we are a nation of immigrants, we're also a nation of laws. Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous. That's why over the past 6 years, deportations of criminals are up 80%. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children. Gang members, not a mom who's working hard to provide for her kids. We'll prioritize, just like law enforcement does every day.
Jessica, are there priorities right now, or is it everybody? If you don't have your papers, you are vulnerable and you could be deported?
Well, those are still the priorities of the Trump administration as well. Of course, they're going to make the most effort to go after people who've been convicted of crimes, people who have been charged with crimes and may be back on the streets because they absconded from their criminal hearings, people who've been deported multiple times before. Those people were deprioritized under the Obama administration. The President Obama was not interested in deporting people just because they'd been deported before, but clearly they will be a priority under the Trump administration. But under President Obama's worst of the worst only enforcement policy, unfortunately, a lot of the worst were returned to the streets and to communities around the country, and those individuals are going to be the top priority for the Trump administration. But President Trump is also saying that if an ICE officer encounters someone while doing a targeted operation, who is here illegally and is potentially deportable, they now have the discretion to put that person on the path to deportation, and that's appropriate. We shouldn't be expecting ICE officers and Border Patrol agents to look the other way when they encounter someone who's in the country in violation of our laws.
Cesar, have you seen?
While I sympathize with
Jessica,
people's families,
I hear what you say, but I'm just wondering, Cesar, have you seen the worst of the worst being returned? As I'm just quoting Jessica back to you. Being returned to the streets of the United States. Have you seen examples of that?
There's no dispute with Jessica or with the Obama administration or with the Trump administration that we should use our power as a nation to keep our neighborhoods safe. There's no dispute in that. But what we are saying and what our just and functional system works is that we shouldn't use our powers and our taxes to deport, detain, and a mother who's just working to give her family a better life. And it may seem, we are not only on that, but that's exactly what's happening. And now we're seeing before.
But there are I'm not aware of any cases like the one that you just described. The people who have been arrested are people with criminal convictions or who've been self-admitted gang members, like up in Washington State recently, and others. While a mother who has children is here illegally is potentially subject to deportation. It's very clear that that person is not going to be a priority target for enforcement. And I don't think that you should start scaring people. People need to be aware of the choices that they're making to be in a country.
It's the administration that's scaring people. I think the administration, President Trump ran very aggressively on a xenophobic campaign that specifically sought to foment fear and to make people afraid of immigrant communities, regardless of their status, frankly. And I think the underlying commonality between this executive order on interior enforcement, the executive order on border enforcement, the executive order trying to ban refugees and Muslims from coming into the country, all share an underlying faulty premise that we should be afraid of people based purely on the fact of where they were born. And there's absolutely no link between someone's likelihood to commit a crime based on where they were born. The examples that I've seen are a domestic violence survivor, a transgender domestic violence survivor. So you can imagine the hurdles it takes for someone to go and seek a protective order, which this woman in El Paso, Texas did. ICE apprehended her in the courthouse, lied about it, even though there was courthouse documentation and the judges released that to the press that showed that they did apprehend her. Can you imagine the chilling effect that that has on domestic violence survivors? That's just one example.
What you're forgetting to mention is that that woman also had been deported from the country 6 times before and had 7 or 8 criminal convictions. So she was an appropriate priority target for ICE. And I think it really doesn't help the discussion to leave out relevant facts like that. That is someone that I think the public would largely agree should be a target of deportation.
I think
when it comes to numbers, we saw that over the past few days, few weeks, immigration deported almost 700 people. And ICE said clearly that over 75% of those people had criminal records. Consequently, 25% of those people did not have criminal records. So it's not about a fear tactic. It is about the facts. And the fact is that Immigration and Customs Enforcement is going after persecuting the people with violent criminal records. But as a collateral arrest, as they call it, they are going to arrest a mother who has no criminal record, or a father, or a dreamer, as we saw, who may be subject to deportation because he's not there. And I think really basically understanding what we're seeing now is that before it was about just simply in traffic terms. If people are going 80, 90 miles per hour, great, let's pursue after them. But if someone's going, if the speed limit is 55 miles per hour and everyone's going 56, 57, and all of a sudden we're going after everyone so I think there is a big difference in terms of how we're prioritizing people who should be processed, who should be detained, versus people who are just simply, here without documentation, or someone who's just speeding 2 miles above the speed limit. And I think that is what we're talking about: prioritization and efficiency use of our resources in this nation when it comes to immigration or any type of law enforcement apparatus.
You know, Cesar, I hear what you're saying. I want to jump in here because, Jessica, you mentioned earlier that it's very clear, it should be very clear to people who would actually be a target. Unfortunately, online, people are telling us it's not clear at all. This is one person who says, these guidelines are frustrating, they're scary, the super vague language is to justify dehumanization and violence against undocumented immigrants. Another person writing in, this is Mauricio, he says, at the end of the day, President Trump's tough executive order will ultimately deport any undocumented immigrant because of a strict interpretation of what he writes, quote unquote, criminal. Do you think that this term is being used too loosely and infractions such as traffic violations, things that are lower on the scale of criminality might ensnare someone?
Well, it's important to remember that nobody gets deported because they had a broken taillight or were shoplifting or whatever. They get deported because they are here illegally or because they violated the terms of their visa. So, you know, when that happens and you do something to bring yourself to the attention of ICE, then, you know, you're taking your chances. You should expect that you may potentially be deported. And if you have some basis for being able to stay, then you can make that claim. But if you're here illegally, you are taking your chances. And I think that's, you know, a reasonable expectation that you could potentially be deported. But I have to say that ICE is not going around dragging mothers away from their children or, you know, going after grandma, going to church or any of those things. They're prioritizing people who are potentially a threat to the public or are, you know, have repeatedly violated immigration laws. If they find other people while they're doing that, it's reasonable that they should also start them on the path to deportation if it's appropriate.
I want to actually just clarify. People can get put into civil immigration removal proceedings or deportation proceedings. And I want to be clear for the audience because I realize there are people from around the world. In the United States, immigration is a civil violation. Being here, if you overstayed a visa, for example, and you're here and you haven't had status for a number of years, does not make you subject to criminal allegations. So immigration is a civil system. Despite that, we detain people in penal conditions in county jails. We treat them like criminals. We use these words that dehumanize them and alienate them from the rest of their communities. And pretextual arrests, things that basically allow for profiling, for officers to say, I see a broken taillight, I'm going to pull that person over. That person looks like a non-English speaker. I could be profiled. Nobody can look at me and know my immigration status purely by looking at me. But what the president's order has done is said, not only are we tripling the number of ICE personnel, not only are we eviscerating priorities. So in criminal justice terms, it's treating a jaywalker the same as you would an armed robber, essentially, under the new priorities. And it's also saying we want to give local and state cops authority to act as immigration agents. So there's a roving force. Now, whether or not all these things happen to the scale that people are afraid that they will happen, we don't know. But the idea that the president and the administration is saying that it's the immigrant communities themselves that are the ones that are causing the panic, when they have intentionally stirred that up, when they have basically said, you are going to live under this cloud of fear and uncertainty, and basically it's a war of attrition. We want to make your life here so miserable. And I just want to really clarify.
That fear and uncertainty, I just want to pick up on that because I'm very curious about how Cesar is feeling right now. Cesar, let me just share with the world a headline that is a couple of years old, but I'm sure your family are very proud of you for this. Cesar Vargas just became New York's first undocumented lawyer. There you are, just underneath it, looking very happy. Yeah, doing what you do, knowing what you know, how comfortable do you feel about your situation? Because you came to the US when you were a little kid, and you are undocumented.
Yeah, and you know, I think there is, when I mentioned before at the beginning, is that there is definitely a genuine fear out there. And for myself, you know, I've been very public about my story, and perhaps, you know, that has kept a level of security that has protected me. But not everyone has that. And for myself, still there is concerns. You know, my mother has to check in on me now, making sure that I'm okay. I have to check in with her to make sure she's okay. I have to give her a know your rights presentation to her because, we don't know whether something immigration agent can come or not. So I think for us is having those discussions that ultimately for her, it's not about I'm here, just being here. She wants to be with her grandchildren. She's 72 years old, and all my siblings, all my grandchildren are either U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents, which brings back with what my clients that I do now as an attorney as well. I'm seeing now one of my clients wrote, who's in the Marines, wrote that trying to change the immigration status of their parents, saying, I'm more afraid of my own government ripping apart my family than the foreign enemy, than ISIS. And I think that is very, very reflective of what this climate of fear that we are living on. That yes, are we going to initiate raids targeting, mothers? Honestly, at this point, as we talked about, we don't know yet. That's the reality. And that is the uncertainty that people are truly feeling, that we don't know how we're going to criminalize. And the other thing is really, the fact that I am Latino, the fact that I could be driving with my license and I could be stopped because I look Latino. The reality is that many of these issues are based on race, have been based. Immigration has always been based on racial connotations, whether it was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 that banned Asians or Chinese, or whether it was when we talked about Italians, Irish, that they were dirty, that they were criminals back in the early 19th century. So it's about race, and it's not just about following the law and enforcing the law. It is about what type of people do we want. And right now, frankly, a lot of this discussion is about we don't want Mexicans, we don't want Latinos in our country, just as it was back before.
Cesar, I just want to jump in there because I want to make sure that I get this in. Femi mentioned that you came here at 5 with your mother, and there are people online who are just like you, people who fall under the category of DACA, that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And we're getting questions from those people. This is Melissa. She says, should DACA students be concerned? Another person on Twitter, this is Juan, who says, the Trump administration needs to be clear about what the future of DACA beneficiaries who are working, going to school, and paying taxes. Avide, do we know anything about those children who are now students and young adults?
So the memo that was signed by Secretary Kelly on Monday said that it referred to DACA as somehow being exempt, but the language, as one of your other viewers mentioned, is vague. It's very, very vague. And I think the reality is that given the overall climate that we're talking about, and the fact that, for example, in Portland, Oregon, there was a young man with DACA who was essentially coerced into making statements that ICE then used to create a basis for detaining him. The fact that there is that climate of fear and uncertainty around the future of DACA and how DACA recipients are being treated under the enforcement priorities, because technically some of them, if they entered unlawfully, could be considered removal priorities. So I think as a result of that, the administration is talking outside at both sides of its mouth. On one hand saying we want to do something good for Dreamers, we recognize their contributions, and on the other hand intentionally leaving things very uncertain, which is going to create difficulties for people making that choice about whether to continue to apply.
There's a headline here, and also remember back to President Trump's press conference at the end of last week, and he says here, DACA is a very, very difficult subject for me. So right now, not too sure what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We've been looking at the new Homeland Security guidelines on this part of the show on immigration enforcement. And our next show, stay tuned, we're bringing back all of our guests to look at how undocumented immigrants are responding to Trump's immigration crackdown. But first, here's one perspective on how the current operations are leading to a climate of fear.
So the current administration has been really harsh with these immigration raids, as well as the Department of Homeland Security memos. And I believe that these two are just tactics for people, especially in the undocumented community, to feel fear and to feel unwanted, and will probably lead to a lot of people to self-deport. However, it is really important that the undocumented community keeps itself informed and keeps calm and plans for whatever may happen next.
If you want to contribute to our conversation about immigration right now in the United States, #AJStream. Malika will be looking out for your comment, and hopefully we'll be able to wrap it into our next edition of The Stream. Avide, Jessica, Cesar, thank you so much for being with us. Take care. See you soon.